Batman. Batman is a superhero appearing in American comic books published by DC Comics. The character was created by artist Bob Kane and writer Bill Finger, and debuted in the 27th issue of the comic book Detective Comics on March 30, 1939. In the DC Universe continuity, Batman is the alias of Bruce Wayne, a wealthy American playboy, philanthropist, and industrialist who resides in Gotham City. Batman's origin story features him swearing vengeance against criminals after witnessing the murder of his parents Thomas and Martha, a vendetta tempered with the ideal of justice. He trains himself physically and intellectually, crafts a bat-inspired persona, and monitors the Gotham streets at night. Kane, Finger, and other creators accompanied Batman with supporting characters, including his sidekicks Robin and Batgirl, allies Alfred Pennyworth, James Gordon, and Catwoman, and foes such as the Penguin, the Riddler, Two-Face, and his archenemy the Joker. Kane conceived Batman in early 1939 to capitalize on the popularity of DC's Superman. Although Kane frequently claimed sole creation credit, Finger substantially developed the concept from a generic superhero into something more bat-like. The character received his own spin-off publication, Batman, in 1940. Batman was originally introduced as a ruthless vigilante who frequently killed or maimed criminals, but evolved into a character with a stringent moral code and strong sense of justice. Unlike most superheroes, Batman does not possess any superpowers, instead relying on his intellect, fighting skills, and wealth. The 1960s Batman television series used a camp aesthetic, which continued to be associated with the character for years after the show ended. Various creators worked to return the character to his darker roots in the 1970s and 1980s, culminating with the 1986 miniseries The Dark Knight Returns by Frank Miller. DC has featured Batman in many comic books, including comics published under its imprints such as Vertigo and Black Label. The longest-running Batman comic, Detective Comics, is the longest-running comic book in the United States. Batman is frequently depicted alongside other DC superheroes, such as Superman and Wonder Woman, as a member of organizations such as the Justice League and the Outsiders. In addition to Bruce Wayne, other characters have taken on the Batman persona on different occasions, such as Jean-Paul Valley, Azrael in the 1993-1994 Nightfall story arc, Dick Grayson, the first Robin, from 2009 to 2011, and Jace Fox, son of Wayne's ally Lucius, as of 2021. DC has also published comics featuring alternate versions of Batman, including the incarnation seen in The Dark Knight Returns and its successors, the incarnation from the Flashpoint, 2011, event, and numerous interpretations from Elseworld stories. One of the most iconic characters in popular culture, Batman has been listed among the greatest comic book superheroes and fictional characters ever created. He is one of the most commercially successful superheroes, and his likeness has been licensed and featured in various media and merchandise sold around the world. This includes toy lines such as Lego Batman and video games like the Batman, Arkham series. Batman has been adapted in live-action and animated incarnations, including the 1960s Batman television series played by Adam West and in film by Michael Keaton in Batman, 1989, Batman Returns, 1992, The Flash, 2023, and Batgirl, 2022, Christian Bale in the Dark Knight trilogy, 2005 to 2012, Ben Affleck in the DC Extended Universe, 2016-present, and Robert Pattinson in The Batman, 2022. Kevin Conroy, Jason O'Mara, Will Arnett, and Keanu Reeves, among others, have provided the character's voice. Creation? First published image of Batman, in Action Comics number 12, announcing the character's debut in the forthcoming Detective Comics number 27. In early 1939, the success of Superman in Action Comics prompted editors at National Comics Publications, the future DC Comics, to request more superheroes for its titles. In response, Bob Kane created the Batman. Collaborator Bill Finger recalled that Kane had an idea for a character called Batman, and he'd like me to see the drawings. I went over to Kane's, and he had drawn a character who looked very much like Superman with kind of reddish tights, I believe, with boots, no gloves, no gauntlets, with a small domino mask, swinging on a rope. He had two stiff wings that were sticking out, looking like bat wings. And under it was a big sign, Batman. The Batwing-like cape was suggested by Bob Kane, inspired as a child by Leonardo da Vinci's sketch of an ornithopter flying device. Finger suggested giving the character a cowl instead of a simple domino mask, a cape instead of wings, and gloves. He also recommended removing the red sections from the original costume. Finger said he devised the name Bruce Wayne for the character's secret identity. Bruce Wayne's first name came from Robert the Bruce, the Scottish patriot. Wayne, being a playboy, was a man of gentry. I searched for a name that would suggest colonialism. I tried Adams, Hancock, then I thought of Matt Anthony Wayne. He later said his suggestions were influenced by Lee Falk's popular The Phantom, a syndicated newspaper comic strip character with which Kane was also familiar. Anthony Wayne's descendant Blake R. Van Leer also became an orphan. Kane and Finger drew upon contemporary 1930s popular culture for inspiration regarding much of the Batman's look, personality, methods, and weaponry. Details find predecessors in pulp fiction, comic strips, newspaper headlines, and autobiographical details referring to Kane himself. As an aristocratic hero with a double identity, Batman had predecessors in the Scarlet Pimpernel, created by Baroness Emiska Orczy, 1903, and Zorro, created by Johnston McCulley, 1919. Like them, Batman performed his heroic deeds in secret, averted suspicion by playing aloof in public, and marked his work with a signature symbol. Kane noted the influence of the films The Mark of Zorro, 1920, and The Bat Whispers, 1930, in the creation of the character's iconography. Finger, drawing inspiration from pulp heroes like Doc Savage, The Shadow, Dick Tracy, and Sherlock Holmes, made the character a master sleuth. In his 1989 autobiography, Kane detailed Finger's contributions to Batman's creation. One day I called Bill and said, "I have a new character called the Batman and I've made some crude, elementary sketches I'd like you to look at." He came over and I showed him the drawings. At the time, I only had a small domino mask, like the one Robin later wore, on Batman's face. Bill said, "Why not make him look more like a bat and put a hood on him, and take the eyeballs out and just put slits for eyes to make him look more mysterious?" At this point, the Batman wore a red Union suit, the wings, trunks, and mask were black. I thought that red and black would be a good combination. Bill said that the costume was too bright, color it dark gray to make it look more ominous. The cape looked like two stiff bat wings attached to his arms. As Bill and I talked, we realized that these wings would get cumbersome when Batman was in action and changed them into a cape, scalloped to look like bat wings when he was fighting or swinging down on a rope. Also, he didn't have any gloves on, and we added them so that he wouldn't leave fingerprints. Golden Age. Subsequent creation credit. Kane signed away ownership in the character in exchange for, among other compensation, a mandatory byline on all Batman comics. This byline did not originally say Batman created by Bob Kane, his name was simply written on the title page of each story. The name disappeared from the comic book in the mid-1960s, replaced by credits for each story's actual writer and artists. In the late 1970s, when Jerry Siegel and Joe Shuster began receiving a created by credit on the Superman titles, along with William Moulton Marston being given the byline for creating Wonder Woman, Batman stories began saying created by Bob Kane in addition to the other credits. Finger did not receive the same recognition. While he had received credit for other DC work since the 1940s, he began, in the 1960s, to receive limited acknowledgement for his Batman writing. In the letters page of Batman number 169, February 1965, for example, editor Julius Schwartz names him as the creator of the Riddler, one of Batman's recurring villains. However, Finger's contract left him only with his writing page rate and no byline. Kane wrote, Bill was disheartened by the lack of major accomplishments in his career. He felt that he had not used his creative potential to its fullest and that success had passed him by. At the time of Finger's death in 1974, DC had not officially credited Finger as Batman co-creator. Jerry Robinson, who also worked with Finger and Kane on the strip at this time, has criticized Kane for failing to share the credit. He recalled Finger resenting his position, stating in a 2005 interview with the Comics Journal, "Bob made him more insecure, because while he slaved working on Batman, he wasn't sharing in any of the glory or the money that Bob began to make, which is why, going to leave, should have credited Bill as co-creator, because I was there, that was one thing I would never forgive Bob for, was not to take care of Bill or recognize his vital role in the creation of Batman. As with Siegel and Schuster, it should have been the same co-creator credit in the strip, writer, and artist. Although Kane initially rebutted Finger's claims at having created the character, writing in a 1965 open letter to fans that it seemed to me that Bill Finger has given out the impression that he and not myself created the Batman, as well as Robin and all the other leading villains and characters. This statement is fraudulent and entirely untrue. Kane himself also commented on Finger's lack of credit. The trouble with being a ghost writer or artist is that you must remain rather anonymously without credit. However, if one wants the credit, then one has to cease being a ghost or follower and become a leader or innovator. In 1989, Kane revisited Finger's situation, recalling in an interview. In those days it was like, one artist and he had his name over it. The policy of DC in the comic books was, if you can't write it, obtain other writers, but their names would never appear on the comic book in the finished version. So Bill never asked me for it and I never volunteered, I guess my ego at that time. And I felt badly, really, when he died. In September 2015, DC Entertainment revealed that Finger would be receiving credit for his role in Batman's creation on the 2016 superhero film Batman v Superman, Dawn of Justice and the second season of Gotham after a deal was worked out between the Finger family and DC. Finger received credit as a creator of Batman for the first time in a comic in October 2015 with Batman and Robin Eternal No. 3 and Batman, Arkham Knight Genesis No. 3. The updated acknowledgement for the character appeared as Batman created by Bob Kane with Bill Finger. Early years. Batman made his debut in Detective Comics No. 27, May 1939, cover art by Bob Kane. The first Batman story, The Case of the Chemical Syndicate, was published in Detective Comics No. 27, May 1939. Finger said, Batman was originally written in the style of the pulps, and this influence was evident with Batman showing little remorse over killing or maiming criminals. Batman proved a hit character, and he received his own solo title in 1940 while continuing to star in Detective Comics. By that time, Detective Comics was the top-selling and most influential publisher in the industry. Batman and the company's other major hero, Superman, were the cornerstones of the company's success. The two characters were featured side by side as the stars of World's Finest Comics, which was originally titled World's Best Comics when it debuted in fall 1940. Creators including Jerry Robinson and Dick Sprang also worked on the strips during this period. Over the course of the first few Batman strips, elements were added to the character and the artistic depiction of Batman evolved. Kane noted that within 6 issues he drew the character's jawline more pronounced, and lengthened the ears on the costume. About a year later he was almost the full figure, my mature Batman, Kane said. Batman's characteristic utility belt was introduced in Detective Comics No. 29, July 1939, followed by the boomerang-like Batarang and the first Bat-themed vehicle, the Batplane, in No. 31, September 1939. The character's origin was revealed in No. 33, November 1939, unfolding in a 2-page story that establishes the brooding persona of Batman, a character driven by the death of his parents. Written by Finger, it depicts a young Bruce Wayne witnessing his parents' murder at the hands of a mugger. Days later, at their grave, the child vows that by the spirits of my parents avenge their deaths by spending the rest of my life warring on all criminals. The early, pulp-inflected portrayal of Batman started to soften in Detective Comics No. 38, April 1940, with the introduction of Robin, Batman's junior counterpart. Robin was introduced, based on Finger's suggestion, because Batman needed a Watson with whom Batman could talk. Sales nearly doubled, despite Kane's preference for a solo Batman, and it sparked a proliferation of kid sidekicks. The first issue of the solo spin-off series Batman was notable not only for introducing 2 of his most persistent enemies, the Joker and Catwoman, but for a pre-Robin inventory story, originally meant for Detective Comics No. 38, in which Batman shoots some monstrous giants to death. That story prompted editor Whitney Ellsworth to decree that the character could no longer kill or use a gun. By 1942, the writers and artists behind the Batman comics had established most of the basic elements of the Batman mythos. In the years following World War II, DC Comics adopted a post-war editorial direction that increasingly de-emphasized social commentary in favor of light-hearted juvenile fantasy. The impact of this editorial approach was evident in Batman comics of the post-war period. Removed from the bleak and menacing world of the strips of the early 1940s, Batman was instead portrayed as a respectable citizen and paternal figure that inhabited a bright and colorful environment. Silver and Bronze Ages, 1950s and early 1960s. Batman was one of the few superhero characters to be continuously published as interest in the genre waned during the 1950s. In the story The Mightiest Team in the World in Superman number 76, June 1952, Batman teams up with Superman for the first time and the pair discover each other's secret identity. Following the success of this story, World's Finest Comics was revamped so it featured stories starring both heroes together, instead of the separate Batman and Superman features that had been running before. The team-up of the characters was a financial success in an era when those were few and far between. This series of stories ran until the book's cancellation in 1986. Batman comics were among those criticized when the comic book industry came under scrutiny with the publication of psychologist Frederick Wortham's book Seduction of the Innocent in 1954. Wortham's thesis was that children imitated crimes committed in comic books, and that these works corrupted the morals of the youth. Wortham criticized Batman comics for their supposed homosexual overtones and argued that Batman and Robin were portrayed as lovers. Wortham's criticisms raised a public outcry during the 1950s, eventually leading to the establishment of the Comics Code Authority, a code that is no longer in use by the comic book industry. The tendency towards a sunnier Batman in the post-war years intensified after the introduction of the Comics Code. Scholars have suggested that the characters of Catwoman, in 1956, and the pre-Barbara Gordon Batgirl, in 1961, were introduced in part to refute the allegation that Batman and Robin were gay, and the stories took on a campier, lighter feel. In the late 1950s, Batman stories gradually became more science fiction oriented, an attempt at mimicking the success of other DC characters that had dabbled in the genre. New characters such as Batwoman, the original Batgirl, Ace the Bat-Hound, and Batmite were introduced. Batman's adventures often involved odd transformations or bizarre space aliens. In 1960, Batman debuted as a member of the Justice League of America in The Brave and the Bold number 28, February 1960, and went on to appear in several Justice League comic book series starting later that same year. New Look Batman and Camp. By 1964, sales of Batman titles had fallen drastically. Bob Kane noted that, as a result, DC was planning to kill Batman off altogether. In response to this, editor Julius Schwartz was assigned to the Batman titles. He presided over drastic changes, beginning with 1964's Detective Comics number 327, May 1964, which was cover-billed as The New Look. Schwartz introduced changes designed to make Batman more contemporary, and to return him to more detective-oriented stories. He brought in artist Carmen Infantino to help overhaul the character. The Batmobile was redesigned, and Batman's costume was modified to incorporate a yellow ellipse behind the bat insignia. The space aliens, time travel, and characters of the 1950s such as Batwoman, Ace the Bat-Hound, and Batmite were retired. Bruce Wayne's butler Alfred was killed off, though his death was quickly reversed, while a new female relative for the Wayne family, and Harriet Cooper, came to live with Bruce Wayne and Dick Grayson. The debut of the Batman television series in 1966 had a profound influence on the character. The success of the series increased sales throughout the comic book industry, and Batman reached a circulation of close to 900,000 copies. Elements such as the character of Batgirl and the show's campy nature were introduced into the comics. The series also initiated the return of Alfred. Although both the comics and TV show were successful for a time, the camp approach eventually wore thin and the show was cancelled in 1968. In the aftermath, the Batman comics themselves lost popularity once again. As Julius Schwartz noted, when the television show was a success, I was asked to be campy, and of course when the show faded, so did the comic books. Starting in 1969, writer Dennis O'Neil and artist Neil Adams made a deliberate effort to distance Batman from the campy portrayal of the 1960s TV series and to return the character to his roots as a grim avenger of the night. O'Neil said his idea was simply to take it back to where it started. I went to the DC library and read some of the early stories. I tried to get a sense of what Kane and Finger were after. O'Neill and Adams first collaborated on the story The Secret of the Waiting Graves in Detective Comics number 395, January 1970. Few stories were true collaborations between O'Neill, Adams, Schwartz, and inker Dick Giordano, and in actuality these men were mixed and matched with various other creators during the 1970s, nevertheless the influence of their work was tremendous. Giordano said, "We went back to a grimmer, darker Batman, and I think that's why these stories did so well." While the work of O'Neill and Adams was popular with fans, the acclaim did little to improve declining sales. The same held true with a similarly acclaimed run by writer Steve Englehart and penciler Marshall Rogers in Detective Comics number 471-476, August 1977, April 1978, which went on to influence the 1989 movie Batman and be adapted for Batman, the animated series, which debuted in 1992. Regardless, circulation continued to drop through the 1970s and 1980s, hitting an all-time low in 1985. Modern Age. The Dark Knight Returns. Frank Miller's limited series The Dark Knight Returns, February to June 1986, returned the character to his darker roots, both in atmosphere and tone. The comic book, which tells the story of a 55-year-old Batman coming out of retirement and a possible future, reinvigorated interest in the character. The Dark Knight Returns was a financial success and has since become one of the medium's most noted touchstones. The series also sparked a major resurgence in the character's popularity. That year Dennis O'Neil took over as editor of the Batman titles and set the template for the portrayal of Batman following DC's status quo-altering 12-issue miniseries Crisis on Infinite Earths. O'Neill operated under the assumption that he was hired to revamp the character and as a result tried to instill a different tone in the books than had gone before. One outcome of this new approach was the Year One storyline in Batman number 404-407, February to May 1987, in which Frank Miller and artist David Mazzucchelli redefined the character's origins. Writer Alan Moore and artist Brian Bolland continued this dark trend with 1988's 48-page one-shot issue Batman, The Killing Joke, in which the Joker, attempting to drive Commissioner Gordon insane, cripples Gordon's daughter Barbara, and then kidnaps and tortures the Commissioner, physically and psychologically. The Batman comics garnered major attention in 1988 when DC Comics created a 900 number for readers to call to vote on whether Jason Todd, the second Robin, lived or died. Voters decided in favor of Jason's death by a narrow margin of 28 votes. See Batman, A Death in the Family. Nightfall. The 1993 Nightfall story arc introduced a new villain, Bane, who critically injures Batman after pushing him to the limits of his endurance. Jean-Paul Valley, known as Azrael, is called upon to wear the Batsuit during Bruce Wayne's convalescence. Writers Doug Monk, Chuck Dixon, and Alan Grant worked on the Batman titles during Nightfall, and would also contribute to other Batman crossovers throughout the 1990s. 1998's Cataclysm storyline served as the precursor to 1999's No Man's Land, a year-long storyline that ran through all the Batman-related titles dealing with the effects of an earthquake-ravaged Gotham City. At the conclusion of No Man's Land, O'Neill stepped down as editor and was replaced by Bob Schreck. Another writer who rose to prominence on the Batman comic series was Jeff Loeb. Along with longtime collaborator Tim Sale, they wrote two miniseries, The Long Halloween and Dark Victory, that pit an early in his career version of Batman against his entire rogues gallery.